And we are live. Welcome to Never a Truer Word, where we look at the words that people choose to use to find out a little bit more about what is going on in what they say. And we're back in Idaho to look at the driver of two of the Idaho Four on the night that they were murdered. I've seen this person described as an Uber driver, a rideshare driver, a private party driver as well. I'm not entirely sure which one it is. A taxi driver is what I think we'll call them through this video. One of the reasons that I like to do things live is that you can get involved in the comments, you can ask questions, you can give your observations or make suggestions in the comments. So feel free to post something in the comments and we'll deal with them as we go. So the private taxi driver who drove Kaylee and Madison home hours before they were murdered has given an anonymous interview. Being anonymous, that means some heat has fallen on what he has said in this interview. People asking the questions like, is he for real? Is he after attention? And do we believe his story? So let's dig into the words and see if we can look at the words that he chooses to use to find out if he is real. Is it someone who's after attention? And do we believe the story that is being told? As we go, we'll look at some things like this. The words that we use are generally the words that we want to use. So either we're being careful and deliberately and consciously choosing our words. I think that's what this taxi driver may do because it's quite an important thing that he is talking about. Or we let our subconscious do the work, and our subconscious always chooses the best words to fit with what it wants to say. Now, this taxi driver is telling a story. So if he's telling a truthful story, if he's recounting events truthfully, then we should hope to see plenty of this. One, the story told in past tense. If we talk about things that happened in the past, we will use past tense. When people make up stories because they're making it up on the spur of the moment, i.e. they're making it up now, they will slip into present tense sometimes. Want to see lots of ownership as well. So that's plenty of use of I, plenty of use of me, plenty of use of my to show that the person talking was there, did really experience what they're talking about. And also want to see linear chronology. So a beginning and a middle and an end. When people are making up stories, they tend to jump about in chronology and go backwards sometimes, forward sometimes. So we're looking for some linear chronology in the story from this taxi driver as well, if it is true. As I said, if you want to get involved, then just get involved in the comments. Any questions you've got, any observations that you've got on the words that this guy uses, then get involved in the comments and we'll deal with them as we go. So let's start with the taxi driver's first statement. He says, "It's weighed on me. I replayed that night a million times over, trying to think if there was some sign or some detail that something was amiss, but there was nothing. It's not lost to me that my job was to get these girls home safe, but that didn't really help this time." So what have we got here? Well, my first thing I noticed is my job was to get these girls home safe, but that didn't really help this time. My job was tends to be something you say when someone hasn't completed something. Like your job was to make sure the kids got to bed on time, but you didn't. Your job was to make sure no troublemakers got into the club, but they did anyway. So my job was to get these girls home safe. Well, there's something coming up in a moment, which I think will be why he has phrased it that way. He alludes to the fact that he did because he says that didn't really help this time. He also says at the beginning there, it's weighed on me in past tense. So it's weighed on me past tense, not it is weighing on me, but it weighed on me past tense. So I don't think it really is weighing on this guy. Certainly when he was talking, when he was giving this interview, he got over it a bit. He said, it's weighed on me. Let's move on with the next statement from the taxi driver. I had known Kaylee and Maddie and Xana too. They would occasionally get rides home and there was nothing out of the ordinary about that night. Remember I said I wanted to see lots of the word I? Well, in the previous answer, he used I a lot. And here again, I had known Kaylee and Maddie and Xana too. So I feel like there's some truth coming through in the words that we've seen so far. I'm believing this is the taxi driver and not someone seeking attention because they're not overplaying how much they knew these girls. He does say occasionally there, which worries me. Also, I had known. Why doesn't he say I knew? I had known is double past tense, if you like. I had and I'd known was sort of double past tense. So why is he putting it so distantly? Why is he putting it so far in that past? And then he says he gave them they would occasionally get rides home, but then he says there was nothing out of the ordinary about that night. If you do something occasionally, do you know what ordinary is? If something's occasional, it doesn't feel very frequent. So I'm not sure how he knows if it's just occasional rides home that he gives them, how he knows there was nothing out of the ordinary about that night. I'm not sure ordinary would have been established. The taxi driver goes on to say, I picked them up about 1:40, 1:45 a.m. They had their food and they were super excited about their mac and cheese, as girls are after they go to the club. Second time he's referred to them as girls. So he sees them as girls first and foremost, rather than students or passengers or human beings, people. He sees them as girls first, which could just be someone who's traditional, maybe slightly older than these girls. Is it potentially a little bit sleazy, but it's not very sleazy, but it is the second time he's referred to them as girls. Now, look, are girls super excited about mac and cheese after a club? This is a new phenomenon to me, not something I knew about, but I guess as a taxi driver who does pick up girls after the clubs for a living, maybe he'd know more about it than me. And are girls more excited about mac and cheese than boys after they go to the club? I don't know. I don't know. What I do know is the first thing he mentions about the girls of any solidity is the fact that they had mac and cheese, the fact that they had their food, they had mac and cheese. So why would that be? Why is the first thing he mentions food? Look, if there's one thing I know about taxi drivers, it's this. They're super sensitive about food in their taxis. So I think that's one thing he remembers with solidity is that these girls brought food into his taxi. It probably made him a bit nervous, if not a little bit unhappy. He goes on to say, they sat in the back and they chatted. They were just normal, just like any other night. They weren't upset about anything or talking about anyone. Again, he seems to say what normal is, but he did say he only picked them up occasionally. And like any other night, that makes it feel like it was a bit more frequent than just occasional. So I'm worried about the disconnect that is there. Now, how do you sit in the back of a taxi and chat and not talk about anyone? Some examples could be, I guess, if you were talking about applied economics or quantum physics, you may discuss those things and not have to discuss anyone. But being picked up after a club, he says they weren't talking about anyone. I'm not sure that's believable. Sometimes the girls would talk about boys, but that night they were just excited about their food. So here's the food mention again. And he says sometimes the girls would talk about boys, but that night they were just excited about their food. So again, he seems to have some idea of normal and some idea of what they would always do when he just says he would pick them up occasionally. And certainly lots of chat about the food. If you've got any comments, put them in the comments and we'll deal with them as we go. Any questions either, then stick them in the comments too. The taxi driver continues. There was no apprehension, no weird feelings there, no upsetness. There was no nervousness about them. They weren't afraid of anybody. There was nobody following them or following us. Now, he's very good at telling us what isn't there. They weren't talking about anybody. There was no apprehension, no weird feelings, no upsetness, no nervousness. They weren't afraid of anybody. There was nobody following them, nobody following us. He is very good at telling us what didn't happen that night. He's less solid about telling us what did happen that night, apart from the fact that they had mac and cheese. He does, though, attach this to them, or he attaches quite a lot of it to them. There was no nervousness about them. They weren't afraid of anybody. So there's some believability in his words there. But I'm interested in why it is that he's able to tell us lots of what didn't happen rather than lots about what did happen. He goes on to say there was absolutely nothing about that ride that was different or abnormal. They were just typical sorority girls talking away, and half the time they didn't pay a whole lot of attention to us drivers. We're just kind of doing our thing. Okay, what's going on here? More about what they didn't do. He's, again, very good about telling us that nothing was different, nothing was abnormal. But then he doesn't say, if you pay attention, that the girls didn't pay attention to him, if that makes sense. If you look closely, He says typical girls don't pay a whole lot of attention to the drivers. He didn't say the girls on that night don't pay a lot of attention to us drivers. And then he says we're just kind of doing our thing. He doesn't talk about himself personally. He talks about drivers in general. We're just doing our thing. And I think this is the key to some of the strange things that I've noticed before. I don't think he paid them any attention at all that night. I think he does occasionally pick those girls up. He hardly knows them at all. They just blend into typical girls for him. Girls who are excited about food, girls who chat about boys, girls who talk about nothing in particular in the back of his taxi. In fact, I think he paid them next to no attention on that drive, just like he does all the other passengers that he has. Only since what happened have they become interesting to him. And that's why he can only tell us what didn't happen, because nothing out of the ordinary happened. Because if it did, he would remember that. So that's why he can tell us lots of what didn't happen, but not lots of what did happen. But it's about to get a little bit interesting. The taxi driver says, I just sort of pulled in front of their driveway. I didn't pull right into the parking lot. I usually try not to do that because that's an easy way to get robbed. Now, previously, he was quite certain, although he was telling us lots of what didn't happen, he was certain about it. Now, look at the vagueness in his language that wasn't there before. I just sort of pulled in front of their driveway. What does that mean? What does that mean? I usually try not to do that, talking about going into the parking lot, because that's an easy way to get robbed. So he talks about usually and trying, again, vague words. So all of a sudden, a whole lot of vagueness has come into his language. But what he's saying here is that he didn't go right up to their house or as close to their house as he could get because he was worried about getting robbed. Then he says, I try to stay in positions where I can go either direction so I can get away if I have to. It's never happened, but you hear about these things. I didn't watch them go all the way in. There were the two of them. It's a relatively safe place. It's not something I would usually sit and watch. So he felt in danger enough that he was going to get robbed to park the car in a safe place where he could make a quick getaway if he wanted to. But he felt it was safe enough for two girls to get out of the car and take a bit of a longer walk to get to their front door. Okay, that doesn't hang together there. I don't believe he felt in any danger whatsoever. He didn't think he was going to get robbed. He's just a bit of a lazy-ass taxi driver, if I'm being honest. He feels bad now that he didn't check. It wouldn't have made a lot of difference. But I think he's covering here for the fact that he's a lazy-ass taxi driver with this one and making excuses as to why. He knows he's going to get asked the question of, did you see the girls go inside? And he's going to have to say, no, I didn't. Comment here from Helen, who says, is that why he didn't feel like he got them home safe, as he was careful about where he parked? Yes, that's why. I think that it comes up earlier when he said, what was it? My job was to get them home safe, rather than saying I got them home safely. I completely agree. He didn't get them home safely. Look, I don't think any damage done there. I think he's maybe just a little bit embarrassed about it. Great question, Helen. Any more questions? Get them in the comments on the chat. That would be brilliant. So yeah, don't believe safety was an issue for him. I think he was a lazy. He's asked, does he ever ask or intervene if he's worried about the passengers? And his response is, sometimes I absolutely will if I feel a kid needs help. I've taken kids to get their stomach pumped if I feel I have to. This is a college town. These kids are just trying to live their lives. We try to look out for them. They don't need to be preyed on. The vagueness is there again. If I feel a kid needs help, not when a kid needs help, I will step in and do something about it. Just if I feel, I've taken kids to get their stomach pumped if I feel they have to. And look, he's talking about kids here. So indication that this is someone older, but I think we kind of knew that from the fact he's a taxi driver doing that kind of job. But if he feels a kid needs help, he's probably talking about boys and girls, or is it just boys more than girls here that he switched his language from talking about girls to talking about kids. He says drivers try and look out for them. This is a college town. These kids are just trying to live their lives. He's talking about the drivers there, try to look out for them. They don't need to be preyed on. So he's not even talking about himself there. It's just drivers in general look out for them. And I'm interested in they don't need to be preyed on, because what he's talked about before is someone excess alcohol, getting their stomach pumped, but now he alludes to the fact that kids are being preyed on in some way. I almost want to make a comment about, is he alluding there that taxi drivers prey on kids? I don't know. Or some taxi drivers prey on kids? I don't know. It's not quite there in the words, but I do wonder what it is that he means by them being preyed on. And if kids are being preyed on, again, maybe just getting your ass in gear and getting up to the drive and getting as close to the front door as you could would be a good idea, taxi driver man. I've been driving here for years and it weighed on me. It was rough to think I was one of the last people to see them alive. Bit of extra information from him here. He's been driving for years and he's never been robbed, but on that night in that safe area, despite never being robbed, he parked further away from the house than he needed to because he was worried about being robbed. So not the nicest guy in the world, I have to be honest with you. A little bit selfish. He says it was rough. So again, his pain is in the past. He is over it. It was rough, not it is rough to think that I was one of the last people to see them alive. It was rough. Also, his concern is all for himself there. No concern expressed for the dead students or for their families, just concern for him being rough because he thought he was one of the last people to see them alive. He then says, when I saw the news on Monday, it occurred to me I was in that neighborhood, but that was before they'd released any names. As soon as I knew for sure it was the girls, I went to the police. Now, this is straightforward. Plenty of use of I in here, so I believe this part of his story. When he saw the news on Monday, he thought, oh, I was there on whichever night it was. And as soon as I knew for sure it was the girls, I went to the police. Straightforward, I believe that part of it. I took about a week off from driving when I just stepped back from it all. Those kids deserve justice and they're not getting it. It feels to this community like the police aren't even trying. I like the unprompted call for justice there. That's good for me. I like to see that that he is asking for justice, but he goes into talking very generically about this desire for the community, not him personally, but to this community. It feels to the community that the police aren't trying, which is 100% related to how they aren't communicating with the community. People are scared. I don't believe that for a second. I'm sorry, I don't believe that for a second. When people talk about people and how people feel, they generally are conflating. They don't really have anything to back that up. And also look at the ordering here. What's most important? The first thing that this taxi driver mentions is that the police aren't communicating with the community. So the first thing he mentions, i.e., he wants the communication. Maybe he's a bit gossipy. Maybe he's a true crime fan and wants to try and solve the case himself. Maybe he just wants to know that there was nothing more he could have done to save the lives of them. The second thing he mentions are people are scared. If people are scared was the most important thing to this guy, he would have mentioned it first. He would have said people are scared and could be sorted a lot if the police communicated more with the community. But he orders it differently. The most important thing to him is the fact that the police aren't communicating. And then this is deceptive. Most of us have very little faith in the MPD. We can't tell if we are watching qualified investigators who have a handle of the situation or if they are completely at a loss, grasping for straws. Well, he said, most of us have very little faith. And again, he's not talking on his own behalf, but everyone, most of us have very little faith. And then he goes on to say, but we realize that we could be watching qualified investigators who have a handle on the situation. Well, that's not having very little faith. That's not knowing. That's not knowing what's happening. So that's deceptive there. He doesn't really know if anyone has little faith or not. I think he just wants to know what's going on. Right. So what do I think then? Well, I believe, to go to the first question, this is the taxi driver. By the way, if you've got any questions that you want to deal with, get them in the comments before we go. Any observations or anything like that as well, get them in the comments and we'll deal with them before the end of this video. But yeah, I think this is the taxi driver. I do think he had no interest in the girls that night. He didn't really know who was in the back of his cab. That's why he can tell us lots of what didn't happen, because there was nothing out of the ordinary. He doesn't remember anything extraordinary happening, but he can't tell us much that did happen, apart from the fact they had mac and cheese, because he's a sensitive taxi driver. I think he was lazy. Real lazy. He dropped them a bit away from his door and he feels bad about that now, or he's worried he'll get flack for it, which is why he's trying to say that the reason he did that was that he was worried he'd get robbed, despite the fact saying he's never been robbed in his life. He's been a taxi driver for ages and he's never been robbed in his life. And he thought the area was safe enough for two girls to take that longer walk from his cab to their front door. He doesn't care that much. He's disinterested. Probably one of those taxi drivers who sees passengers as a bit of an inconvenience, especially after the pub, and best ignored. If I had to guess, I'd guess this is a single man, older, sort of late 40s, early 50s through to 60s, lives alone, not a lot of interest in the world around him either. What do you think? Let me know in the comments, or you can get in touch on social media. If you go to connect.neveratruerword.com, you can find all the socials there and give me your thoughts on the Idaho 4 taxi driver.